A beautiful sunrise on Sapelo Island. It is a perfect setting for an early morning beach walk. It should hold the promise for a bright new day, but Caesar and Nancy face it with a tinge of sadness. Should they leave? Should they stay? All of their children have left here and live on mainland America. Nancy and Caesar are among the few 40 or so permanent residents on Sapelo Island. Nancy says when you find 9 people gathered together, it is a crowd. Nowadays, those crowds are rare, and you can drive for hours on Sapelo without encountering anybody. Sapelo is one of the 4 largest islands off the coast of the state of Georgia, on the east coast of the United States of America. One of the reasons why Sapelo is important is that most of it is a nature reserve under government protection, and scientists come here to study the rich marine ecosystems and wildlife. No cars are allowed on the island, and so people going there have to leave their cars behind and board the ferry. From Darien on the mainland, it takes about 45 minutes to get there. Those who travel to the island are scientists who carry out research on the nature reserves, tourists, or local residents. The local residents of Sapelo Island are another reason why the island is so important. There are a unique population of the United States of America called the Gulagiji. The Gulagiji are African Americans and descendants of the enslaved people from West Africa. What is special about them is that they have a unique culture and has resulted from a mixture of their African heritage, their experience of European culture from former slave masters, and their relative isolation from mainland America. Their uniqueness can be seen in aspects such as language. This is how Nancy tells the story of Red Riding Hood, a childhood fairy tale that many are familiar with.
Time way back, way long time ago now, it been a little gal, and that little gal and the mammy, it lived way back up in the wood, and it been poor, great God, it been poor, and the little gal mammy make all the clothes. Now one day make them a little red thing. It's from for the head jump, from for the back here, and then they come leave the throat. And that little gal, he liked to wear them all the time. They clean and wise, and the people there to call them Little Red Riding Hood. Now one morning, way before they clean, the little gal mammy get up and put on the pot of collard greens and ham hock, and they make a cornbread. And when it gets too cooked, they pack them up in a little basket, and then they get the little gal up and give him hominy. And the little gal just shoot pack it gut. The mammy tell him, look again, your gal mammy is bad off sick, you're sick in the bed, you can't do for yourself. I want you to come and share basket of something to eat. I want you to do for him, yeah? And the little gal tell him, yeah, and the little gal get to pack it gut. And he get up and put on the little red things, from across the head jump, across the back here, and then let him eat the throat. And he get the basket of something to eat. And go on down the road, go on to the gal mammy house.
Okay, Caesar. What time should we start tomorrow morning?
I see you they clean.
Pardon? What do you mean by they clean?
I see you they clean.
Meaning?
Yes. That means I'll see you in the morning when the day get clean, because the day gonna get dirty tonight, and in the morning it's gonna clean. So that means I'll see you early in the morning when the day get clean.
The words are English, but the language structure is similar to that of some West African languages. Charles Hall was born in Sapelo.
The language was my first encounter with the mainland, in that I realized I spoke differently. And in spite of the fact that my mother would always insist that we speak proper English as she understood it, and but our accent was still different than the mainland. Now, I didn't recognize it as being unique then. I know it is now. But the motivation was to try to learn to blend in with the all-American society and system.
The first human presence on Sapelo Island is thought to be that of the Native American Indians who supposedly used Sapelo as their hunting ground some 4,000 years ago and had settlements on it. It is believed that they built this structure and possibly used it as a ritual site. Sapelo has at different times been occupied by various Europeans, including Spanish missionaries and French royalists. These are the ruins of the chocolate plantation, which alternately belonged to French and English Europeans. The arrival of West Africans on Sapelo is situated in the 700s. They were brought here as slaves to work on European-owned plantations. The ruins of the chocolate plantation still have the slave quarters as well as the sugar mill evident. The footprints of the African Americans are there even in the vegetation. The Gula Geechee up till today still use this plant, mullein grass, for relieving high blood pressure. At the height of the slave era, 400 slaves were owned by one person alone, Thomas Spalding, a Scottish man who at one time between 1802 and 1851 owned most of Sapelo Island, 4,000 acres in all. Spalding is said to have been fairer than most to his slaves. With them, he achieved great things. He is credited for having developed a building material called tabby, made of a mixture of limestone and seashells. Buildings from the slave era today contain tabby, and tabby ruins can be found here in Darien, just across the river from Sapelo. Spalding's influence was crucial in developing the shipping and timber industries of Darien. He also developed an irrigation and drainage system in Sapelo, which permitted him to grow sugar cane for sugar and rice on the island. The skills which the West Africans brought with them, as in rice cultivation, were put to the benefit of Spalding. Cotton, too, was an important cash crop, and all these activities made him a powerful millionaire at the time. After Spalding, there were other millionaires that also practically owned the island. Coffin and Reynolds, the car builder. This house, originally built by Spalding and today known as the Spalding-Reynolds building, went from hand to hand and was modified by successive owners. Today it is used as a holiday resort. By the time the most recent owners came along, slavery had been abolished, but the blacks continued to work for the millionaires. This is the cotton field on which Caesar's grandmother picked cotton as a child. Caesar is a direct descendant of perhaps the most famous slave on Sapelo Island, Bilali Muhammad, who himself, once a slave sailor, was caught and sold into slavery from Guinea in West Africa. Bilali was a Muslim. He wrote these manuscripts. A good proportion of the Gula Geechee of Sapelo Island are his descendants. They are buried here at Behavior Cemetery at the Behavior neighborhood of Sapelo Island. Legend holds it that the locality was called Behavior because the slaves moved here to be closer to their workplace. Their owner, who was worried they might escape, allowed them to stay if they promised to behave.
I'm going home to live with Jesus. Gonna be grand, the tallest tree.
For themselves, the African Americans built self-sufficient settlements and communities spread all over Sapelo and hardly ever needing to go to the mainland. The first African Baptist church, for example, was located in the Ragoon Bluff community, and though once completely destroyed by a storm, has been restored for historical preservation. Caesar had a happy childhood, and the sense of community was strong and very African.
Community life was great. All the older people, the adults, back then the kids used to respect everybody. And the older people look out for the kids. If they see the kids doing wrong, they would let them know they're doing wrong, or take a switch and whip them and bring them home, and then they got another whipping. Older people, when you go to their house, they would give you a treat. If it wasn't nothing but a piece of bread that they would put in your hand, but you always appreciate these things. And it got to the place where you was glad to go to somebody's house to take a package. And also growing up as a kid over here, I can recall that older folks used to band together and help each other. If they had a hog to butcher, they would get together and butcher that hog, and everybody got a piece of that meat.
Nancy and Caesar are residents of Hog Hammock, the last African American community on Sapelo Island. It is rather quiet. Caesar says in the last 28 years, only 5 families have moved back here. Their neighbor's house is empty because she died, and there is nobody to occupy it. In 1994, there were 70 permanent residents in Hog Hammock.
It's just a shame that we have dwindled down to such a low number that it looks like we're going to be following the same trail as some of the other communities and other islands.
Caesar and Nancy have already sold some of their property. Their willingness to sell is probably surpassed by the demand by those who can afford to buy property here from the mainland, property that they use as holiday homes.
We are under some duress as far as living conditions are concerned, not like utilities or anything, but the fact that we do have high taxes, and we're looking forward to the day that children will start coming back home. But with the taxes being so high, it looks like the population might dwindle down and we may not be here very much longer.
SICAS, the Sapelo Island Cultural and Revitalization Society, is leading the way to cultural preservation in Sapelo. The SICAS library was set up for that purpose. Michelle Johnson, a journalist who has documented the history of Sapelo and whose husband is a Gula Geechee, runs the library on a voluntary basis.
As a repository for information about the culture, and we do a series of programs every year that highlight the history of the island and the connection to Africa. And we're sort of learning as we go along. We have researchers come in and historians come in. We have a linguist who works with us on a regular basis. And so we're sort of learning as we go along and building up this collection, because a lot of the memories of Sapelo Island's history are simply that, they're memories. People have memories and the oral history. And we want to document that because a lot of the younger people are not as interested in the history right now. We think they'll become interested later.
Sapelo falls within the Gula Geechee corridor that runs from the South Carolina coast through Georgia to Florida. Charles Hall is a member of the Cultural Preservation Commission that is working hard to preserve the Gula Geechee culture. If this effort is to succeed, then it will be important to listen to all the Gula Geechee voices.